welcome to this conversation. We're diving into something I think a lot of us can relate to. That feeling of having so much available, endless entertainment, constant connection, and yet sometimes feeling, well, just not quite satisfied.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a puzzle, isn't it? All this potential for fun, but real joy can feel like it's just, out of reach.
Right.
You know how it is that thing that used to really excite you just doesn't quite hit the same way anymore?
Definitely.
Maybe it's that scroll through social media that feels more draining than engaging, or those little treats that lose their appeal almost as soon as you have them.
That feeling is really at the heart of what we're going to explore today. We've been looking at some ideas around why this might be happening.
Okay.
This sense that having access to so much pleasure doesn't automatically lead to a rich and fulfilling life.
Yeah.
So our goal in this discussion is, well, to get a better handle on what's going on underneath the surface.
Right.
And maybe think about some ways we can find a bit more balance.
Okay, so to start, one of the really interesting things that came up is just how different our lives are now compared to, say, even a few centuries ago. Can you paint a picture of that for us?
Absolutely. I mean, if we think back just a few generations, the main challenge for most people was, simply put, scarcity.
Scarcity.
They often didn't have enough food, clothes were basic, entertainment was pretty rare, and information spread slowly, very slowly.
Yeah.
Life was largely defined by a lack of the things we just take for granted today.
Right, a world where just getting enough to eat was a major daily concern. Now, if we jump forward to today, it's almost the complete opposite, isn't it?
It really is. We're constantly surrounded by options.
Really?
Every kind of food imaginable, news that literally never stops, endless ways to entertain ourselves, shopping, social media like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, games, you name it.
It's there whenever we want it, morning, noon, night.
Exactly. We've gone from a world defined by what was missing to one that's just overflowing with potential pleasures.
Yes.
And this abundance, it really raises a fundamental question.
Which is?
If we have all these avenues for fun and enjoyment so easily available, why isn't everyone just walking around feeling fantastic all the time?
That's the paradox, yeah. And that leads us to this idea of what some are calling invisible addictions.
Right.
These aren't maybe the really severe addictions we usually think about, but more like everyday habits that quietly start to, well, take over.
That's a great way to put it. Think about those habits that seem harmless on the surface, maybe scrolling your phone or online shopping.
Yeah.
But gradually, they begin to affect our overall well-being and kind of chip away at our sense of control.
Okay.
There's a book, Dopamine Nation, that delves right into this. It really focuses on the role of dopamine.
Ah, dopamine, the pleasure chemical.
Well, yeah, it's involved in pleasure and reward, but it's more complex. The book explores how even seemingly normal activities can become these little sub-addictions. It talks about how our brains are kind of wired for novelty, always seeking the next new thing.
So in this world of constant new stuff, we're just feeding that novelty-seeking part of the brain all the time.
Pretty much. And that constant chase for the new, the next hit of dopamine, might actually contribute to that feeling of blah. Even when we seem to have everything.
So even things that seem pretty normal, they can become these little sub-addictions, all driven by this dopamine chase.
That's a key point, yeah. And what makes these sub-addictions tricky is how they often just sneak into our lives bit by bit.
It's not like a sudden thing.
Exactly. It's not usually a dramatic shift. It's that extra few minutes scrolling, the decision to watch just one more video, that quick impulse purchase online. And before we realize it, these patterns are pretty ingrained. We might only notice how much they've taken hold when we, say, finally look at our phone usage statistics.
Oh yeah, the screen time report.
Or just feel really uneasy at the thought of being disconnected for a bit.
That hits home. This leads to a really key point. The idea that pleasure and pain are actually, two sides of the same coin in our brains? How does that work?
This is a core concept. Our brain has a system that processes both pleasure and pain, and they operate in a kind of opposing way. Think of it like a seesaw or a scale, trying to stay balanced.
Okay, a seesaw.
So when we experience something pleasurable that releases dopamine, the brain immediately tries to restore that balance. It wants to get back to level.
How does it do that?
It does this by creating an opposing force, almost like putting a weight on the pain side of the seesaw. It pushes us back towards a neutral or sometimes even a slightly uncomfortable state.
Like a thermostat kicking in to cool things down after it gets too hot.
That's a good analogy, yeah. It's trying to regulate itself, maintain homeostasis.
So if we keep chasing that pleasure, that high, the pain side of the seesaw gets heavier, making it harder to get the same level of enjoyment the next time.
Exactly. That's precisely why we often experience diminishing returns with repeated pleasurable things.
Ah, okay.
The brain's attempt to reestablish equilibrium means that each subsequent exposure gives us less satisfaction. The initial high gets smaller.
And what happens when the pleasure stops?
Well, that's fascinating too. When the pleasurable thing is gone, that opposing force, that weight on the pain side, is still there for a bit. And that can show up as feelings of unhappiness, restlessness, or even what feels like withdrawal.
Like the letdown after a binge watch or scrolling for hours?
Precisely. Or that irritability when you can't play your favorite game right away. That's the seesaw tilted towards the pain side.
That really clarifies things when we think about stuff like video games or social media or even just snacking. It's easy to see how that balance could get really out of sync.
Definitely. And it could potentially lead to what some might call internet addiction, or similar patterns with other behaviors. The brain regions involved are part of the reward pathway, areas like the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex, constantly trying to manage this balance.
It's certainly not an overstatement to think about it in those terms, the impact it can have.
Right. While the immediate consequences might not seem as severe as, say, substance addiction, the cumulative impact on our daily lives and mental well-being can be really significant over time.
Now, another intriguing aspect you mentioned is this modern tendency to avoid any kind of discomfort, even like boredom.
Yeah.
It seems a bit counterintuitive, but the idea is that this avoidance might actually be making things worse for us.
That's right. There's this kind of widespread cultural notion now that constant happiness is the ultimate goal. And any form of discomfort, whether it's physical pain or emotional unease, should be eliminated immediately.
We see that everywhere.
We do. We see it in how we sometimes raise kids, wanting to shield them from every single challenge. And even in medicine, there's been a huge emphasis on achieving a pain-free existence, which is understandable, of course.
But the sources suggest this constant avoidance has a hidden downside.
The argument is that by constantly trying to avoid difficulty, any difficulty, we actually become less resilient.
We lose our tolerance.
Exactly. Paradoxically, we might become more prone to suffering in the long run because our ability to tolerate discomfort decreases. We might even develop a fear of discomfort itself. And that shift in medicine, while well-intentioned, prioritizing pain relief above all else, has also raised some questions. There's even some evidence suggesting that certain painkillers, like opioids, might actually slow down the healing process in some situations.
Wow. Okay, let's go back to dopamine for a second. We know it's tied to pleasure, but it sounds like its role is a bit more nuanced than just being the happy chemical.
Absolutely. It's much more about motivation and anticipation. Dopamine is really fundamental in the pursuit and expectation of pleasure and reward.
Ah, the seeking part.
Yes, it's what motivates us to seek out things we think we'll find enjoyable. And importantly, the amount of dopamine an activity or substance triggers is often used as a rough indicator of its potential to be habit-forming or addictive.
Right. And the sources give us some interesting comparisons, don't they? Like chocolate versus more powerful substances.
They do. For example, eating a piece of chocolate might cause, say, a 50% increase in baseline dopamine levels. Sex might double it, around 100%.
Okay.
Nicotine is higher, maybe 150%. Cocaine can cause a jump of maybe 225%. And something like methamphetamine can trigger a massive surge, like 1,000% or even more.
Whoa.
The key takeaway is that anything that causes a substantial, rapid increase in dopamine has the potential to become something we crave intensely and could develop a dependency on, whether it's a substance or a behavior.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture of the issue, this shift to constant abundance, these subtle dopamine-driven habits or invisible addictions, and maybe the downsides of always trying to avoid discomfort. What can we actually do about it? What are some practical steps listeners, you guys can take to try and find a better balance?
That's the crucial part. The good news is there are definitely things we can do. The very first step is really about self-reflection and just becoming more aware.
Paying attention.
Exactly. Take some time to honestly think about your own habits, maybe things you feel uneasy about or want to change. Ask yourself, why am I really doing this? What need or desire am I trying to meet here? Often these behaviors are pretty automatic, almost unconscious. So this kind of honest self-examination can give you some really valuable clues. Are you trying to escape anxiety or boredom? Are you looking for connection, maybe managing anger or some kind of underlying pain?
That makes sense. Just taking that moment to ask why can be surprisingly insightful, I bet. What comes next?
Well, once you have a bit more awareness, the next step is to really consciously consider the negative consequences of these habits.
The hard part.
It can be. Our brains often try to shield us from thinking about the downsides, rationalize the behavior.
Yeah.
But actively focusing on the problems these habits have created, maybe time lost, effects on relationships, health impacts, can be a really strong motivator for change.
Right, kind of facing the music, so to speak.
Yeah.
And after that reflection and acknowledging the consequences.
Then comes the really important part of self-abstinence, which basically just means setting boundaries and consciously stopping, or at least reducing, the unwanted behavior.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, for sure. Just deciding to stop isn't always enough on its own. So it's helpful to create obstacles.
Yeah.
Make the behavior less readily available, less easy to slip into.
Like what?
Could be as simple as leaving your phone in another room when you're eating or trying to sleep, deleting certain apps temporarily, making it harder to access the thing you're trying to limit.
Okay, so making it a little harder to just mindlessly engage. What about more specific techniques we can use day to day?
Setting time limits can be really effective, especially for things like social media or gaming. Decide beforehand on a specific amount of time, say 30 minutes, and really try to stick to it. Set a timer.
Okay.
Another really useful strategy is to practice delaying gratification. When you feel that urge, that impulse to do the habit, try to consciously put it off for a short period, even just 5, 10, 15 minutes.
Just wait a bit.
Yeah. Often you'll find that intense craving actually decreases quite a bit if you just wait it out for a little while. It breaks the immediate stimulus response loop.
I can see how that not right now, maybe later approach could help break that immediate impulse. What else can we do to maybe shift our focus overall?
A big one is shifting our focus away from constantly seeking instant pleasure, that quick hit, towards engaging in activities and responsibilities that give us a sense of meaning and accomplishment.
Like work or hobbies or helping others.
Exactly. Things that require effort but provide a deeper, more earned sense of satisfaction. This could actually be a much healthier, more sustainable way to get that dopamine release.
Mm-hmm.
And as your baseline, that seesaw we talked about, starts to adjust back towards neutral, you might find that you begin to appreciate the smaller, simpler joys in life much more, things that didn't register before.
That makes a lot of sense, the difference between earned satisfaction and just instant gratification. And mindfulness also comes into play here, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Mindfulness, which is essentially about observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment, can give you incredibly valuable insights.
How so?
It helps you notice what triggers your unwanted habits, what feelings come up right before you reach for your phone or whatever it is, what happens in your body. By simply noticing what's happening without immediately reacting, you gain a better understanding of the whole pattern that's driving you.
Becoming more aware of the whole cycle. Now, this next one sounds like a bit of a bigger step, but the idea of a dopamine fast was mentioned. What exactly does that involve?
Yeah, a dopamine fast is a more intensive approach. It basically involves a set period where you intentionally abstain from most or all activities that are known to trigger large artificial releases of dopamine.
So what kind of activities are we talking about? Just social media and games?
It often includes those, yeah.
Yeah.
But it can also extend to things like listening to stimulating music constantly, compulsive shopping, excessive consumption of sugary foods or junk food, watching porn, sometimes even news binging. Basically, anything that gives you that quick, easy, high level of stimulation.
And how long does it usually last?
The suggestion we saw mentioned was typically around 30 days. The idea is that the first couple of weeks are often the most challenging as your brain adjusts.
Right, the withdrawal phase again.
Exactly. But the goal is to give your brain's reward system a significant break, allowing it to reset its baseline. The hope is that it becomes more sensitive again to healthier, more natural sources of pleasure and satisfaction.
Like a real system reboot for your reward pathways. And finally, the sources touch on this really interesting, maybe counterintuitive idea of deliberately engaging with discomfort. How does that fit into rebalancing things?
This relates directly back to that pleasure-pain seesaw or balance. By intentionally exposing yourself to things that are mildly uncomfortable or require effort.
Like what, for example?
Things like pushing yourself during exercise, taking a cold shower, tackling a challenging task you've been avoiding, maybe even just sitting with boredom for a bit.
Okay.
When you do these things, you're essentially pushing the seesaw towards the pain side temporarily. And because the brain always seeks balance, the rebound effect can actually be a subsequent feeling of well-being, calm, or even euphoria afterwards.
The runner's high effect, maybe. Or feeling great after a cold plunge.
Exactly like that. It's
Yeah.
about intentionally leveraging that rebound effect.
Yeah.
It also builds your psychological resilience and tolerance for discomfort, shifting your brain's expectations away from constant ease.
So it's not about getting rid of pleasure altogether or constantly seeking out pain, obviously. It's about finding a healthier, more dynamic middle ground.
Precisely. The key insight is that the relentless, often unconscious pursuit of dopamine, especially easy dopamine, can unintentionally shift our baseline state.
Making us feel restless.
Yeah, restless, maybe a bit anhedonic, less able to enjoy the things we used to find genuinely pleasurable. That initial thrill from scrolling social media or playing a game just doesn't last, or requires more and more to get the same feeling because the pain side of the balance has been upregulated.
So as you, the listener, are going about your day, maybe take a moment to think about how these ideas connect with your own experiences, your own habits.
Yeah, and reflect on how maybe intentionally incorporating small amounts of healthy discomfort, effortful activities, facing challenges, and focusing more on things that bring a genuine sense of meaning might lead to a more adaptable, more balanced reward system in your brain.
Which could ultimately allow you to appreciate the full spectrum of life's experiences more deeply, both the inevitable challenges and those often overlooked simpler pleasures.